good? I think we're good. Everybody here?
Everybody checked in.
Everybody's checked in? Okay. Okay, I think we're good. We can start. Good morning. We are on the record in case 20200027, electronic application of Kentucky American Water Company to amend tariff for the establishment of qualified infrastructure program charge. Can everybody hear me okay? Wave your hand if you...
Yes, sir.
All right, good. My name is Robert Cisco. I'm Vice Chairman of the Public Service Commission, and joining me today via video conferencing is Commissioner Matthews. Unfortunately, Chairman Smith will not be able to attend due to a conflict, but will review the hearing materials and recordings and participate in the final decision. At this time, I would normally caution attendees to set your cellular phones to silent mode or turn them off. Due to the current state of emergency in Kentucky, the Commission is hosting this hearing via video conferencing. Since this continues to be a learning experience for everyone, there are a few suggestions that I would offer. In addition to the normal courtesies regarding cell phones, these tips may help with clarity and avoid feedback issues for the video conferencing hearing. Mute your microphone if you are not speaking. I cannot emphasize the importance of this enough. Unnecessary background noise is a big distraction. Attorneys, when interjecting, please state your name for the video record so that the video record is clear. If you use a phone for the audio and a computer for the video, turn off the computer audio. Otherwise, it will be feedback and it becomes very annoying. If you are in a room with several people on their own computers, turn off the computer audio for all but one computer. Otherwise, there will be feedback and it's very annoying. If another participant is in another office, close the doors between the offices. Sound carries further than one thinks, and again, that can cause feedback, which is very annoying. Once in the GoToMeeting software platform, go to your settings. The icon looks like a gear to ensure that the microphone setting is on the microphone you are using. There is a pull-down menu feature in GoToMeeting settings that will list the available microphones. Use wired headphones or wired earbuds for better sound quality. Wired is preferred because wireless devices may lose power depending upon the length of the hearing, and hopefully that won't be an issue today. Keep a charger nearby in case your battery runs low, and please alert the Commission if you are experiencing technological failure that prevents your participation at any time during the proceedings. Attorneys should contact staff at the previously provided cell phone number. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence on Kentucky American's proposed Qualified Infrastructure Program, QIP, surcharge to replace aging water infrastructure. So at this time, we will have the entry of appearance of counsel, and given the unique challenges of conducting the video hearing, I will also request that each party's counsel also identify their witnesses at this time. So for the applicant, Mr. Ingram.
My name is Lindsay Ingram. I'm with Stahl, Keenan, Ogden in Lexington, Kentucky, 300 West Vine Street. I'm here on behalf of Kentucky American Water. I'm their external counsel. With us today, we have the two Kentucky American witnesses who have provided direct testimony in this case, and they are also the two witnesses that have sponsored the data responses that have been filed in this case. The first is Mr. Kurt Stafford of Kentucky American Water, and the second is Ms. Elaine Chambers of Kentucky American Water.
Thank you. For staff?
Your Honor, Deb Benny, on behalf of the Office of General Counsel.
And?
Nancy Vinsel, on behalf of Office of General Counsel.
Thank you. It has been advised that public notice has been given and filed into the record. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any outstanding motions? Okay.
No.
So, Should anyone from the public like to provide the commission with public comment, instructions to call in are located on our website, psc.ky.gov. The phone lines will remain open for several minutes at the start of the hearing and close if there are no callers or after everyone has had an opportunity to speak. Should you call in, please state your name and address for the record before making your statement, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. If there is more than one caller, please be respectful and allow one person to make a statement at a time. It should be noted the comments may also be submitted on the PSC's website at psc.ky.gov. Mr. Penny, do we have anyone on the line for public comment?
This is Jeb Penny with the Public Service Commission. Is there anybody on the line that wishes to make public comment? Your Honor, it appears nobody's on the line.
Okay. Mr. Ingram, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We call our first witness, Kurt Stafford.
Okay. Mr. Stafford, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury? Please proceed.
Mr. Stafford, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Kurt Allen Stafford.
And would you provide your job title and your business address, please?
And my job title is Director of Engineering at Kentucky American Water. And my address is 2300 Richmond Road, Lexington, Kentucky, 40502.
Mr. Stafford, did you cause to be filed in this matter written direct testimony in early March of this year?
I did.
And I asked you the same questions here today that are in that written direct testimony that was filed in early March. Would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
And have you also sponsored several data responses that have been filed in the record of this case?
Yes, I have.
I asked you the same questions that were asked in those data requests. Would your responses be the same as the written ones that have been filed in this matter?
Yes, they would.
Your Honor, Mr. Stafford is available for cross.
Mr. Penny, will be it you or Ms. Vinsel question?
I will be asking questions, Mr. Stafford.
Mr. Penny, you may proceed.
Morning, Mr. Stafford. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Very good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So what is the status of the bid documents signed by contractors that include the description and scope of work on the QUIP projects?
So as we mentioned in our application, we're going to have all contracts that we sign with contractors will be submitted to the Public Service Commission. As of this date, we haven't signed any of those contracts yet. As I mentioned in some of my discovery responses, we're still in the process of getting those signed. We've kind of given the schedule for all those major replacement projects that the contractors will be working on. The first one will be starting in July, and so we will be getting that first contract over to the Public Service Commission in the near future when we get that contract signed.
Okay, and which project is the one that you anticipate to start in July?
Give me a second, let me check and verify which project that's going to be.
There might be in line B, where you may have included it.
That first project that I'm talking about will be the Priscilla Road Phase 1 project.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And Kentucky American has identified in projects contained in budget line B, which are the QUIP mains replaced, restored, and also line D, mains relocated. Does Kentucky American have a spreadsheet or table that identifies each project within budget line items F through M?
I guess when you say budget ones that they're in, can you verify where you're getting that information from?
so because you have, budget line B is the quips main replaced restored. You identified specific projects for that as well as the mains to be relocated in budget line D. But for budget lines F, H, J, L, and M, I don't think that you all listed individual projects. Do you all have a list of those individual projects that are included in those?
So I think this is probably a good time to sort of set the groundwork for how we do these projects.
Okay.
So line B projects, which is the main replacement projects, those are the larger projects that we've included in the QIP application. Those are done by contractors. They're kind of larger scale main replacement projects. The line D, which are the main relocated lines, those are also relocation projects that are somewhat bigger too, and they're relocated when a municipality or state agency asks us to relocate out of a right of way. For instance, line F, which is hydrants, valves, and manholes replaced. Line H, line J, line L, and lines M. Those are all small projects that are ongoing. Majority of that stuff is just done by our internal staff, so we don't really list out projects. The projects that we break out, that we speak a lot to in the QIP application, are the line B projects and the line D projects.
Okay, so because one of the things I was contemplating asking if you did have a spreadsheet or a table that included the line items for, not B or D, but through F through M, that you're saying that does not exist internally?
Well, I think through the testimony and also through the discovery responses, we've gone back and tried our best to show how we create those line items as budgets, and we've given quantities and different unit prices for the different lines that we do. Just like for instance, like for line J, which is meters replaced, in the discovery responses, scattered throughout several discovery responses, we spell out how many meters we're going to replace, which types of meters we're going to replace, et cetera, et cetera. So we do spell that out, even though those aren't specifically projects like we think of like a large main replacement project. They're small ongoing things that are that we don't spec out like that.
Okay, all right. And just to be clear,
Mr. Petty,
yes.
this is Izzy. May I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm very sorry. I'm told that maybe the live feed on the PSC's website is not up and running. It may be an operator error that I'm hearing from, but I just want to make sure that it's available for public viewing on PSC's website because of what I was just told. I apologize for the interruption.
So let us check this out. This will confirm, and we'll be on hold here for a couple of minutes, and I'll find out and make certain that that's happening.
Thank you, Your Honor.
It might be operator error. It's live.
Okay, I apologize for interruption then.
Not a problem. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to confirm on the website too. Let's see. Your Honor, I've tried to pull it up on our computer, or my computer as well, and it does not appear to be streaming. It says waiting for the KYPSC, so.
All right, hold on. Might not be operator error. Mr. Ingram, we'll check. Our IT guy thought it was good, but our lawyer doesn't, so we know we got to listen to lawyers.
I'm just, okay. Let's see.
Vice Chair, we have a split opinion. I'm able to bring it up,
Okay.
so I'm not sure exactly that we have this difference.
All right, so if Ms. Vinsel is able to obtain it, then I defer to her counsel. So you're able to you're able to view it on the YouTube channel?
Yes, I'm going back to duplicate it.
Okay.
And I am just told, Your Honor, that it's working as well.
All right.
Okay. All right, so we can move forward. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Penny.
All right. Thank you. All right, Mr. Stafford, coming back to you. Sorry about the delay.
No problem.
And I just want to clarify that the budget items that you've included in your testimony and your response to data requests, I think those are specifically B, C, D, F, H, J, L, M, and Q. Those are included in the QUIP, but other budget items that you've not included in your testimony, you've not identified, are not included in the QUIP. Is that correct?
So there's 9, what we call reoccurring, budget line items that are included. That includes, line B, line C, line D, F, H, J, L, M, and Q. Those are the nine budget line items that are included in the QIP application. And then there's also one investment project, which is the Cox Street Booster Station project.
Right. Okay, and those are the only ones that are included in the QUIP application, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. In response to the Commission's first request for information, question 5B, in response to the question, you stated that Kentucky American has increased its focus on service and lateral replacements beginning in 2018. Can you explain the reasons for the increased focus on these replacements?
Yes. So I think that in the 2018 rate case, we discussed Kentucky American has been putting an emphasis on infrastructure replacement. And we've been increasing our B line spend, which is our main replacement line. We've been ramping that up. And then also the service and laterals line, which you're speaking about, we've also been increasing that, trying to make sure that we're replacing aging infrastructure on an increasingly progressive cycle.
Okay. And this is a question I'm sure that Mr. Ingram has at least answered in previous, in one way, shape, or form, may have at least addressed, but one category of the QUIP projects is relocation and replacement of infrastructure that's buried in the public right-of-way that has to be relocated due to municipal or state projects. And in response to the Commission staff's first request for information, 1A, you state that municipal or state agencies will allow utility to bury their infrastructure in the public right-of-ways, but with the understanding that the utility will bear the cost of relocation when maintenance or construction impacts that buried infrastructure. So my question is, on what basis is the requirement that Kentucky American bear the cost? Is it a statutory, regulatory, or is it a contractual requirement that Kentucky American pay for those costs?
Yeah, okay. So in that response, I mentioned the LPCG. Also, we talked about the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. So, for instance, with LPCG, we have a franchise agreement with the city of Lexington, and it spells out who pays for relocation within the right-of-way. It actually reverts back and talks to some of the ordinances that the LPCG has. So in Chapter 17 of their ordinance, it's specifically 17C-19E4. It talks about...
would you please slow down and say that number again, please, sir? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure, no problem. So in ordinance number Chapter 17 of the LPCG ordinance is where it speaks specifically to that, and that references 17C-19E4. That gives the city the right to ask utilities to relocate at no cost to the city.
Okay.
And also, we talk about the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. So they have 2 Kentucky revised statutes that speak specifically to that. Those 2 are KRS 179.265 and also 177.035. Those specifically speak to relocation costs and who has to bear those costs. Also, if with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, if there's federal dollars involved in that project, there's also a federal statute, which is 23 CFR 645.111 subpart A that speaks to that.
Okay. And so I believe correct me if I'm wrong, but all the relocations that are included in the proposed QUIP are inside of Fayette County. Is that correct?
When we talk about budget line D, typically there's some projects that we know about that we have, as I mentioned in the testimony, we have coordination meetings with the state transportation cabinet and also with LFECG. So there's some projects that we know about. I mentioned, I think, 2 projects that we talked about that would be streetscape kind of road widening projects for LFECG, and then there's another one that we talked about that would be with the state transportation cabinet. A lot of times throughout the year, those projects pop up. Sometimes funding is there for them at the beginning of the year. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they come up in response to something. LPCG maybe will be doing a project, but they need to relocate a storm drain. Maybe we have to relocate a water line to get out of their way. And also, some of the state projects are larger projects and they have longer lead times. So typically we might know about those projects a little more in advance. But those are the 3 that we mentioned in the testimony and the discovery responses.
Okay, and then I guess my question was, those projects that you at least listed are in Fayette County, and so my question relates to parts of the Kentucky American Waters plant that is outside of Fayette County. You've cited the franchise agreement with Fayette County, but is it your understanding, or to the best of your knowledge, do the other municipalities or government entities that are not the highway department, or not Fayette County urban, the Lexington Fayette County urban government, have the same requirements regarding moving of Kentucky American's mains and Kentucky American bearing those costs?
Yes, typically with municipality, we'd have a franchise agreement with them, and that would spell that out, and it would be consistent with the LFECG's franchise agreement.
Okay. And I'll move on from that question. I'll move on to the question about the booster the booster station. Could you describe the controls in place to ensure that spending on budget lines B through M and the Cost Street booster station remains separate from other capital projects that are funded with current rates? And if this is a question that's better for Ms. Chambers, just let me know.
Can you repeat that question?
Just what are the controls that are in place to ensure that the budget lines that are included in the QUIP, along with the booster station, remain separate from other capital projects that are funded with current rates?
Okay. So we've created a way to capture those specific costs. One of the things that we talk about in our application is that we'll have a reconciliation. So those specific lines will be captured. The spend on those will be captured during the QIP during the test period, and then we'll have the reconciliation. The way that we've set up our accounting is we'll be able to track those, and there might be some additional details that Ms. Chambers could provide for that when she testifies.
Okay. And then you testify that the Capital Investment Management Committee meets monthly to review capital expenditures compared to budgeted levels on capital projects. Is that correct?
That's correct. So just to kind of elaborate, and it sort of ties into your last question, each month the CMIC is a committee that meets and looks at what we spent the prior month, and we look at what's coming up. We look at the rest of the forecasted year. So each month we're doing a sort of a feedback loop where we get the prior month spend. We look at our landing zone, where we're at on each one of the projects, look at what we're potentially forecasting for the rest of the year, and we move our spend around. So we can shift, if we needed to push dollars a little bit towards one line, we can do that, or if we need to pull dollars from another line, we can do that too. But it's a holistic approach, and it's really been successful over the past couple of years. I think in the 2018 rate case, Mr. Brent O'Neill's testimony, he mentioned that over the course of, I think, 2014 to 2017, we were within a little over 1% of the total overall budget. And that's really been, I think, our monthly planning cycle has really been a big emphasis. The emphasis on the planning and the capital management has really been a big push to get us to that point.
Okay. And when you say moving from line to line, you're referring to budget lines, or you're referring to actual water lines, moving those?
But budget lines.
Okay. And then, so does the Capital Investment Management Committee have any oversight over the QUIP projects?
Yes, they would.
Okay. And is that the monthly, are those line items for the QUIP, will they be reviewed monthly as well?
Yes, they would. They would be reviewed just the same way that all the other budget line items would be reviewed, to make sure that we're in compliance and that we're doing all we need to do and making sure that we're more accurately forecasting spend.
Okay. And would you mind explaining how Kentucky American would address the situation of significant cost overruns that if they occurred on the QUIP projects?
So right now we've done our best guess of estimating these projects based off historical spend, and so each month we monitor these projects where they're at, where we think they're going to. So if for some reason if we were a little bit over on one project, we would potentially pull back from another project to make sure that we, in total, the QIP wouldn't be more than it would be projected at, and that would be caught in the reconciliation.
Okay. And I think this was, you testified to this, or at least you sponsored responses to the Commission staff's second request, 5B. And in describing the capital budget monitoring program, you testified that dollars can be reallocated each month during the monthly budget review. I think you just spoke to that, but can you expand upon that?
So each of the budget line items and also the investment projects like the Cox Street Booster that we mentioned before, each one of those projects gets looked at on a monthly basis to make sure that we're in compliance. So if any of those gets out of tolerance, if they get 10% or more out of tolerance, as far as a landing zone. So the landing zone is taken where you're looking at where you're at any one given time, and you're looking at where you're going. So if there's anything projected to be at 10% or more out of tolerance, we'll figure out a way to bring that back into tolerance. So that's a sort of a holistic approach to be able to make sure that we manage the budget as a whole and bring things back into tolerance.
And so that means that money can be allocated to QUIP projects, from different budget line items within the QUIP projects, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, is it possible that dollars that are allocated to QUIP projects could be reallocated to non-QUIP capital projects?
No, the way we would manage the budget, we would keep QIP in its own separate kind of box. So those would be allocated within QIP.
Okay. And then also in response to Commission staff's second request for information, 5A, you provided estimates for in-service dates for the 7 identified budget line B projects. And
correct.
My question is, you sponsored that a while back. So have the estimates changed or otherwise been affected by the current pandemic?
No, they haven't. We've actually been monitoring that really closely to make sure that our contractors haven't been seeing any issues, and we've actually been working as normal throughout the year. But that's something we've been monitoring. So at this point, we don't see any kind of changes to those projects and the timing of those projects, nor the cost of those projects.
Okay. And then what would happen if these projects are not placed in service before Kentucky American's next QUIP filing in 2021?
Well, that would be the reconciliation would catch that, and so that would just end up being something that we would do at a later date. But that would be caught up in the reconciliation if we weren't able to complete those projects on the times that we estimated for the projections.
Okay. All righty. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Commissioner Matthews?
Let me get turned on here. I have a question. Have any of these projects been proposed or be in process without the QUIP?
So that's a good question. So if you go back and you look at the 2018 rate case, Mr. Brent O'Neill spells out that we've been trying to accelerate the main replacement rate. One of the things that we talked about in the 2018 rate case is that we've had a lot of cast iron main breaks. Cast iron is a type of pipe material that we have out in the system that is sort of dated, and so we have about 15% of our system is cast iron, and it actually results in about 60% of our main breaks. So we've been trying to accelerate the replacement of cast iron mains out in the system, but there's still a long way to go. And I think in that 2018 pipe replacement program, there was a document that was included in the 2018 rate case that talked about pipe replacement. We really need to get the QIP in place to be able to accelerate our spend. And we talk about in the rate case and also in our QIP applications, we want to accelerate and spend about $6 to $10 million of additional funds towards replacing mains and also this aging infrastructure. So I don't think if QIP wasn't in place, I don't think we would be able to accelerate that main replacement rate and get back on track with replacing these before they actually have a lot more unplanned main breaks. It's actually 10 times more expensive to replace a main on an unplanned, unscheduled basis rather than a planned basis. And that's what we talked about in the 2018 rate case, and we also bring that up in the application.
Okay, and I remember that, but the $6 to $10 million a year, how much of this 15% of the system will that replace? How long will it take?
So that's a great question. We looked at during the 2018 rate case, we presented that main replacement program. So that will take to replace that. It's roughly about 250 miles of cast iron mains. It's going to take about 25 years, and we projected in the QIP that we're going to replace about 10 to 13 miles of mains a year. This next year that we're talking about, we're actually ramping up towards that. And but here, I would say the following year, the year after, we're replacing about 10 to 13 miles a year. We figured we went back and looked at it from several different perspectives and took the customers into account. How much it would cost customers to accelerate and get the cast iron mains and the problematic mains out of our system, and realized that 25 years was kind of the optimum thing that sort of balanced the cost with customer impacts.
So how did these other projects, the service lines and so forth, they jump up into the QUIP program? If the QUIP program primarily is the cast iron mains. Yeah,
that's another great question. So what we did with the QIP is we tried to take a holistic look at the system. So there's a lot of utilities around the country that have just focused on replacing mains, but they're still having a lot of problems because if you don't take a holistic standpoint where you're replacing not only the mains, but some of the booster stations, replacing the older meters, replacing the older service lines, hydrants and valves and things like that, you're still going to have a lot of the same problems that you would have otherwise. So with QIP, we've tried to take a holistic approach. It's obviously geared more towards main replacement, which, causes where we have the main breaks and things like that. But it's really a holistic approach to infrastructure replacement, where we're replacing aging infrastructure to try to get back to where we need to be.
And the service lines and meters and booster stations wouldn't be ordinary maintenance, O&M, part of capital spending for when an asset reaches the end of its life and you need to replace it with the depreciation that you've booked?
Well, we talk a lot about main replacement, so that's the main emphasis of the QIP, and that's where you get that. We talk about that $6 to $10 million of additional money that we want to spend each year on QIP. So that's about $4 to about $7 million of that. But we also need to accelerate our other infrastructure line, the replacement rates on those too. And so that's why we added the hydrants, the valves, the service lines, and things like that to make sure that we're capturing all of it. Because while main replacement is a very important part of it, it also needs to include those other 8 RP lines that we spoke about earlier.
I guess I'm struck by your 60% of the leaks are in 15% of your system that's cast iron. How anything other than the cast iron would fall out in your ranking? What is I guess what you're saying is if we're replacing 2 miles of main, we're going to replace all of the hydrants and all of the service lines and all of the meters that are at a certain age while we're doing that section. Is that what you're saying?
Well, just for instance, like So for instance, we obviously need to get rid of that cast iron we talked about that's causing us a lot of problems. But we also have we also need to include other aging infrastructure too. So there's a lot, we're trying to look at it from a holistic standpoint, but the vast, I would say the biggest emphasis of the whole QIP program is on replacing main and increasing that rate. But it's also, just like all other utilities around the nation, Kentucky American Water is faced with a lot of aging infrastructure. The average age of our system is getting older, and so that's why we've included some of those other assets too, because we want to do it from a holistic standpoint.
So how do you decide when the capital, how are other projects that are not paid for by QUIP, how are those chosen?
So, each year when we create our capital budget, we're looking to create a capital budget that, that will provide safe, adequate, and reliable water service for our customers. So we're looking at replacing things that are nearing the end of their useful life, all across the board, whether that's mains or whether that's meters or whatever. And so that's not going to change. The whole emphasis of the QIP was to be able to pull discretionary funds forward and be able to accelerate our infrastructure replacement rate, so we could sustain that and get us back to where we felt like we needed to be as far as the age of our system infrastructure. Does that answer your question?
Has the spending on the other projects remained constant, and you've added QUIP on top, the QUIP projects on top of that, or the QUIP projects have replaced some of the projects that would have otherwise been replaced under just regular capital?
So that's a good question. So the like for instance, like the J line, which is the meters replace line, we're just replacing meters based off length of service. So we're still going to continue to do that. That's not going to change. Some of the other lines too, like the hydrants and the valves. Each year we're going out into the system. We're doing inspections of hydrants and valves, and the problematic ones that we note during those inspections. Those are the ones we're going to replacing the next year. So we're not necessarily accelerating all the lines. We do mention in the 2018 rate case, and then also in the QIP application, like for instance, the Cox Street booster station is a project. We brought some of those forward, and those booster stations were underground booster stations that had issues with confined space entry. They were just really old and past their useful life, and so we did accelerate some of those. But for the most part, the QIP focuses on main replacement, but it's also a holistic approach.
So are you spending the same amount on the other capital projects that you have been over the last few years?
So like we said, we've accelerated the B line spend, which is the main replacement line. There's several lines that we're doing that are going to be similar, like the J line, like the meters replaced. That would be a line that we're still doing. We're still replacing them off length of service. There's, what we try to say is on the B line, we're spending $4 to about $6.9 million additional each year. And then all those other lines, every line except for the B line, which there's 8 other reoccurring lines, and then there's the investment projects, we're spending $1 to $4 million additional on those lines. So we are spending some additional dollars on those other lines other than main replacement, but main replacement is going to be a significant factor pushing QIP.
I don't have any more questions.
Was that it, Commissioner Matthews?
Yes.
So I want to follow up on the question Commissioner Matthews asked, because I don't really think you gave the answer that at least I was hoping to hear. She specifically said, are you spending the same amount on capital that you have in the past in addition to the QIP spending? Meaning, is your capital budget for all other the same or approximate to what it was in 2018, 17, 16, whatever, and that the QIP is in addition to?
I apologize. I apologize. I misunderstood that question. Yes. So we're going to be spending the same amount of dollars that we have been spending that we talked about in the 2018 rate case, and QIP will be in addition to that. So yes, I apologize. I didn't totally understand that question. We'll still be spending the same amount of dollars, but we're going to be accelerating some of the old aging infrastructure replacement through the QIP program. I apologize.
No, that's not a problem. So how do you determine what the total amount of the QIP budget is?
So like I mentioned earlier, you know, the B line or main replacement line, we looked at that from a standpoint of we looked at how quickly we needed to replace mains out in the system, and we fell on that 25-year cast iron replacement number that I mentioned earlier, and so that's what we thought that $4 to $6.9 million additional increase on the B line each year. That was something that could actually meet both the needs of you know, looking at customer impact and also looking at the age of the infrastructure. And we also looked at the other lines that were outside the main replacement, and that's where we came up with that $1 to $4 million additional each year. We thought that was doable and sustainable.
Okay, so maybe you didn't understand my question. The total amount you're going to spend is $12.5 million, right?
Yes.
Okay. How did you decide that $12.5 million was a good number for the QUIP program?
So going back to your previous question, so you know we're still spending the same amount of dollars on those RP and IP lines that we mentioned right there, but we're adding additional dollars into it for the main replacement projects. For example, we're going to be adding the dollars to that line, so we're adding additional dollars to each one of those lines in the course of over the 25 years. Like we said, we're going to be adding $6 to $10 million of additional spend on those lines to be able to replace aging infrastructure. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but I'll continue to ask.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
I'll try to.
So we've got $12.5 million we're going to spend, and from what I see in the notes, $7.4 million is on 4 projects, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I guess most of that is for main replacement?
Yes, that's correct. So the $7.4 million that we're spending on the B line includes those 7 large projects that we talk about in the QIP application. And then we also included, like I mentioned earlier, one of the emphasis, or one of the points of emphasis was that we replace a booster pump station each year, and so that's the Cox Street booster station. That's another additional $1 million that we've included in QIP. But like I've said before, the real push is the main replacement line, or the B line.
Okay, so how much of the $12.5 million is actually for replacement of main that is cast iron or galvanized?
All of it.
Of the $7.4 million, all of it?
Yes. Yeah. In the QIP application, we spell out those projects and what they're replacing. So if you go back and look at the application where we speak specifically to the B line, all those main replacement projects target galvanized cast iron, and there's a little bit of AC main in there too. One of the things that we found in that 2018 study was that galvanized is the leakiest type of pipe that we have in our system, but we don't have a lot of it in our system. So, over the course of 25 years, we're trying to get out cast iron and galvanized, and so that's what these projects are targeting, and that's what the QIP is going to, the B line for the QIP is going to be targeting for the next 25 years is going to be cast iron, which I mentioned before is the causes the most leaks out in our system.
Okay, so I'm going to go through where I'm trying to go with this, and we'll see if we can get to where I'm trying to be.
Okay.
When we went through the rate case last time, it was during a period of time the commission was interested in water utilities upgrading their lines and being concerned that the life cycle of main replacement was in some cases as much as 300 years, which is way out of bounds for any expectation of a useful life, in our opinion. It's particularly bad for infrastructure on the smaller water districts. But since Kentucky American Water came to us and said, we have this same condition and we'd like to accelerate, and we believe if we have a QUIP program, then we can find additional funds to accelerate the replacement of those mains and therefore reduce leakage, because technically Kentucky American Water is at 20+%, I believe, on water loss. And so in an effort to reduce that, and in order to repair infrastructure, the commission said, okay, they're gonna replace mains, great idea. We're gonna see what we can do, and we're gonna permit them to implement this surcharge, which is where we are right now in reviewing the program. Now, if it's the commissioner's fault or whosever fault it might be, I think the emphasis was on water line replacement, water main replacement, and obviously there's other items in here, including manholes, which I'm not sure what that has to do with making the system better, but we'll go down through the list here. You said you've taken a holistic approach, and the holistic approach is, I think, and you'll have to correct me because I was having a little bit of difficulty following it. Is it for all of the lines associated with the specific section of main you're replacing, or how did you decide on the meters, the service lines, the manholes, and whatever else? Where are they located in relation to the water mains?
So okay, that's a good question. So the hydrants. So just say, for instance, the valves and hydrants. And I know you mentioned manholes in there, but there's no manholes. That's
Okay,
just
that's good.
that would be something if there was had to be a sewer system involved, and there's not in this situation. So for the valves and hydrants. So the valves and hydrants that we're planning to replace from July 2020 to June 2021 would include ones that we found as having issues during our valve and hydrant inspection program, or we encountered them during some kind of other problematic thing. So those are ones out in the system that aren't necessarily related to the mains that we're replacing, that are out in the system that we need to go out and replace proactively. So,
That's okay. So let's stop there for a second.
Okay.
So, how do you determine, because Kentucky American's geographic footprint is so large, how do you determine, because you must have many of these that need to be replaced. How did you decide specifically on what water lines you were going to do and what meters you were going to replace?
So for the water lines, we have a hydraulic
These are
model
the service
that we
lines,
look
not
at.
the mains, okay? These are service lines. I'm
Oh,
talking about.
oh yeah, the service lines. So the service lines are typically, they would come to us through like a program or a situation where, say we have a leak on a service line, and our crews might go out and dig it up, and they find that it's something that needs to be replaced. It's an older line, So we're replacing from the main to the meter. So that's our part of the service line. So they may go out. There may be a leak on that line. There may be like a call for maybe there's a water quality issue or something like that. There's some reason that we're going out and replacing those. But we have a crew that goes out and fixes those lines. But those lines are separate from the B line, which is the main replacement. So this is so I guess to answer your earlier question, this stuff isn't all related to the main replacements. There's different criteria for each one of these. So for instance, like the J line, you see there, the meters replaced. So that's where we're going out and we're replacing meters around the system based off length of service. So that's also doesn't really have anything to do with the B line. So that's where we try to get I mentioned before, we try to get our holistic approach to it all, is because while the emphasis is replacing mains, and that is obviously, as you can tell, that's the biggest dollar value item that we have in our QIP. We're trying to also replace a lot of other aging infrastructure, and there's certain criteria around each one of these, and they aren't necessarily related to the B line. So, for instance, we've talked about the D line, which is the mains relocated. That's in coordination with municipal and state agencies where they do their projects. But there's also for instance, like the C line, the unscheduled main breaks. That's on an unplanned basis. So that's something that we're reacting to.
Have you identified specifically what service lines and meters are going to be replaced, or is this I budgeted X amount of dollars and I'm going to spend that as I go through it, replacing those, whatever happens to come up to meet for example, it says replacement or improvement of up to 6,332 meters and meter settings nearing the end of their useful life, budget 1.2 million. Where are those meters or meter settings located? Is this just a number of meters, or is there a specific location you're doing, or what's that 1.2 million represent?
So there would be specific meters out in our system that based off the length of service, need to be replaced. So that would be a list that would, yes, they're already identified.
Okay,
Yes.
so they could be located wherever.
Yes, they're all scattered out through the system.
Okay, so there's detail that supports the 1.2 million.
Yes, and we can provide that.
Okay, so let's go to the next portion of my question here. The total program is 12.5 million, right? And the
Correct.
main is 7.4 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
That represents, 7.4 million represents 60% of the total. Okay? Why would Kentucky American Water be taking a holistic approach on replacing items that I think from the Public Service Commission's perspective are more operating and maintenance normal issues, rather than replacing the cast iron and the galvanized, which is the main reason why the QUIP program was approved in the first place, was for water line replacement and trying to take care of the infrastructure that's creating a lot of leaks in the system. It really wasn't, and I'm going to say that the order may have said that, and we might have to go back and look at how we look at this in the future for the program, but the main purpose of the program is to replace mains, and only 60% of the $12.5 million is going to replace mains. The other 40% are ancillary projects that I don't disagree, they may need replaced, but I'm not sure why they're in this program.
So before earlier I was mentioning the Cox Street booster. So QIP in the 2018 rate case, one of the things that we mentioned was that we wanted to pull some of those booster pump stations. We wanted to be able to accelerate the replacement of those booster pump stations. So that's where I mentioned the $1 to $4 million that we want to spend outside of the B line, and why that was important, because that helps us accelerate. While not only, obviously we're talking about cast iron mains, and that's going to be the emphasis of QIP. We obviously believe that replacing that's going to cut down on leaks, and that's going to help drive down those numbers. There's also a lot of older infrastructure that's out in the system too that we want to replace too. And that's why we looked at it from a holistic standpoint. I know I keep mentioning that, but it is really, it's one of those things. If you just focus on replacing mains, there's a lot of things that you're missing out on. So I think adding that $1 to $4 million of additional spend outside of the B line or main replacement line, it is pretty critical to look at this from a holistic standpoint, and that's how we approached it in the 2018 rate case and also in the QIP application.
So I don't disagree that a water utility needs to take a holistic approach, because obviously the infrastructure varies. There's all different kinds of materials that go into making a system functional. Not a disagreement. How many years would it take to replace the mains if you took all of this budget, applied it to the projects, replaced the mains, and then went back and replaced some of these things that you thought needed to be done because they're aging or whatever? How many years could you cut off of the main program, the replacement main?
I'd have to go back and take a look at that from a budget standpoint. But that's something I could get for you. But the emphasis, like going back to this, the emphasis is just to accelerate some of our spend on these other things outside of the B line, just because we think that's going to help the system to become more robust and also benefit the customers in the long run.
Yeah, I think when the commission looks at it, I understand you want to replace 6,332 meters. Are those service line meters?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and so
They're meters. They're going to be going to customers.
Right. So we have many utilities that are replacing meters right now, but trying to do it through a infrastructure improvement project. Some of them are having to do it because their meters just plain don't work. But for you guys, because we're holding you to kind of a higher standard here, we did give you a program that for an IOU, an investor-owned utility, is probably something unusual outside of the gas industry. And we're looking for, I think, you guys to do the operating and maintenance type items and to go ahead and do the main replacement as quickly as possible. Now, the other commissioners, I'm sure we'll discuss this after the hearing, and they may have a different viewpoint on that, and staff may make recommendations, but that would be my suggestion and how to approach this. So, I don't know, it seems to me like we're kind of off base here on this. But at any rate, those are all the questions I have. Mr. Ingram, do you want to do a redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, I do have some questions. I think it would be helpful if I can share my screen for a couple of these, if I can make that work from a technology perspective. The first thing I want to share is Kentucky American's existing tariff. So I'm going to try to pull that up if that's okay.
Sure.
And Mr. Stafford, you let me know if you can see it, or if anybody can't see it, please let me know. Okay, can you all see that tariff?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Stafford, just so the record's clear, do I have it blown up large enough that you all can view can you see the type?
I can read it.
Yes.
Okay, so this is does this look like to you the front page, the cover page of Kentucky American's existing tariff, Mr. Stafford?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and are there a couple pages in this tariff that directly describe and authorize the QIP program?
Yes, I believe it's pages 48 is where it speaks to the specific types of infrastructure that are included in QIP.
Okay, and so the QIP tariff sheets, you said 48, so there's first sheet 48, correct?
Correct.
And there's first sheet 49, correct?
Correct.
And that's the existing tariff. So at the bottom, well, and then the next sheet is unrelated to QIP, correct? So it's just 2 pages, is that right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
And so the second sheet of the current tariff has a 0% charge for QIP because this was the tariff sheet that was approved by the commission in the last rate case. And so, of course, that number will be 0. And what Kentucky American's asking for now is for that number to be 1.62%. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so going back to first sheet 48, I don't mean to belabor the point here, but the tariff sheet does define where my cursor is, QIP eligible utility plant. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And so when could you describe the 2 subcategories of QIP eligible utility plant that are defined there, please?
Sure. So there's 2 categories. One is distribution infrastructure, and the other is water treatment infrastructure. So distribution infrastructure includes mains and valves replaced for existing facilities, hydrants, distribution services, meters, meter installations, power generation, pumping equipment installed as replacements for existing facilities, unreimbursed funds for capital projects for relocations. And then the water treatment infrastructure includes source of supply and water treatment structures, pipe and equipment, including sampling equipment, SCADA equipment, power generation, and pumping equipment installed as replacements for existing facilities.
Okay, and so if that is the defined QIP eligible utility plant, do the 9 budget line items that you have presented in this QIP case fit within those descriptive categories in your tariff sheet?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And then the next thing I wanted to show was some of the, or a couple of the data responses in this case. So I'm going to go to actually PSC question 2-4, and that means the second set of information requests, item number 4. And can you see that on my screen, Mr. Stafford?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and do you recall that the response to this particular data request attached to it a data response that Kentucky American provided in the rate case?
Yes, it was a discovery response that Mr. Bruno O'Neill sent in about QIP.
Okay, so here's 2-4. That's the first page of it. There's the second page of it. there's the third page of it. Well, actually, on the second page, part B, that's where my cursor is. Does that reference the attachment to this data response, which is Attorney General Question 1-59 in Kentucky American's last rate case, 2018-358?
Yes, it does.
And does it indicate that a copy of that is attached?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so I'm going to flip to that rate case DR that was attached here. And there it is. Attorney General's first request for information. As you said, the witness is Mr. O'Neill, and it was question number 59. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so the question asked, could you read the question and then the answer provided, please?
It says, provide all projects that Kentucky American Water will include in its proposed QIP over the next 5 years, include the cost of each project and the purposes of each project, pipe replacement, pumping station replacement, treatment plant replacement, etc. Please see attached.
Okay. And so we said, please see attached. And I'm not sure if that's large enough, but is that the attachment to AG 1-59 in the last rate case?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And could you just walk us through kind of what this spreadsheet is showing with a particular emphasis on the projects that Kentucky American said it would include in the QIP, and then the dollars it said it would include in the QIP in the in the QIP period for 2020 and 2021.
Sure. So I think one thing to take note of on this is that the number for 2020 are only the last 6 months of 2020. You can see if you look at the 2020 column, there's an asterisk next to the 2020, and it says 2020 QIP spend occurs following future test year ending June 2020. So all that adds up to about 5.4 million, and that covers the 9 lines that we talked about earlier. Each of those 9 lines that were included in the QIP application, and there's also one thing we've got to take into consideration is that this spreadsheet was built on calendar years, whereas our QIP application is built on a time period that starts July 1st and runs to the end of June. So you have to be able to look at the values that we've included. You have to look at that 2020 number, which is 5.4, and then you look at half of 2021. So 2021 is about 18 million. So roughly, if you assume that you took half that, you would add that $9 million together from 2021 to that $5 million in 2020, and that would be around $14 million. And we proposed about $13 million. But the line items here specifically address what we've added into what we've included in the QIP application. They follow very closely to those numbers that we proposed in the rate case.
And so, for example, what you're showing in this spreadsheet, or what Mr. O'Neill showed, here's 2 line items for B and B2, your main replacements, right? And so these, I hope you all can see my cursor. Mr. Vice Chairman, can you see my cursor, what I'm focusing on there?
Yes, I'm actually looking at it on my paper copy that I have.
Okay, great. So if you've got the 2020 column, the 2021 column, and you're looking at rows for B and B2, those are your main replacement projected costs that you made in the rate case, correct?
Correct.
And then also you've got the various other line items shown here in the rate case that Kentucky American has also proposed for inclusion in QIP. And that would include everything from unscheduled main replacement to your line J, your meter replacement, your SCADA equipment, those kinds of things. And so I guess what I'm just asking, just a very basic question, is what Kentucky American has included in the QIP case consistent with what it said it would include in the QIP case back in the rate case in response to AG 1-59?
Yeah, yes, it's consistent with what we said we're going to do.
Okay, and those categories here, just to go back to the tariff sheet, those categories here, those match up well with the categories of QIP eligible plant that exist in Kentucky American's tariff sheet that we went over a minute ago. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think those are all the questions I have at this time, Mr. Vice Chairman.
And I appreciate you pointing that out, as staff has already pointed out to me that was what was already approved in the 2018 case. And my comments that I made in regard to this being an initial program that we provided for Kentucky American Water in order to take care of some of the aging infrastructure is that we would have liked to have had more emphasis on main replacements, and it may be my problem for not understanding what exactly was going to be in the program, even though it's laid out very clearly there, so I'm not going to criticize Kentucky American Water for what they may have presented. I also believe that going into the future, we may want to look at this and how much money is spent in each category in order to focus more on the mains than we do on some of the ancillary items. I mentioned the meters. The only meters that get replaced under a surcharge under the small water districts is if they're replacing the whole set of meters, and they do it through usually a KIA and some ancillary funding that comes through a surcharge. But in terms of just regular replacement of meters, the 6,332, I don't know what percentage that represents, but certainly it's not a whole system meter replacement, and it's being put into this QUIP program. And again, I appreciate the fact that you've pointed out that the tariff and the budget that was presented is exactly what was presented in the prior, so I'm not being critical of Kentucky American Water for doing what they said they were going to do. I'm probably looking at it more from the perspective of looking into the future and how we're going to approach this, because obviously the main priority of the commission is replace infrastructure related to leakage, which is primarily in the mains. So I'll leave it at that. You presented documents that support what you've presented, and of course the commission is going to look at this part of the program that we look at this year, and then going forward we'll look at it whatever we're going to do if we make modifications or whatever. But those are all the comments I have. Mr. Penny, do you have any other questions you want to ask?
Just a follow-up relating to franchises. This question is Mr. Stafford, but Mr. Ingram, you might be able to answer it. Mr. Stafford, you said that when I was asking you about who bore the costs for moving mains with regard to municipals or county or city governments outside of Fayette County, you said that the local franchise agreements may govern that. One of the things that caused me to do is to check, and we don't have any franchise agreements on file except for Kentucky American's franchise agreement with Lexington Fayette County Urban Government. Just as a way of course, could one of you all please check to see if you do have franchise agreements with other municipalities, and if so, those need to be on file with the commission.
Sure, we will definitely follow up on that with you, Mr. Penny.
Okay, and then just to clarify, I think we do have one post-hearing data request question coming out of this recent round of questioning. That would be the supporting documentation or information relating to the meter replacements. Because Mr. Stafford, you said that you have that information, you have supporting information for that.
Yes, we can get that. We can get that to you.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Commissioner Matthews?
So, Mr.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Matthews, do you have anything else?
I don't.
Thank you. Mr. Ingram?
I just had a quick question about hearing data requests. We've already received one. Is that something that commission staff will put in writing, and we'll get those later? Or do you want us just to take notes and respond by whatever deadline gets set?
The commission staff will provide a written request. We'll go over at the end of the hearing, in case there's other post-hearing data requests, set a date for them to be issued by the parties, and then responses due, and we'll go from there, okay?
Okay. And just one more item for Mr. Penny. I think Mr. Stafford misspoke on franchise agreements, Mr. Penny. I think, to the best of my knowledge, the only franchise agreement that Kentucky American has with any municipality is with the city of Lexington. I know that there is, of course, Kentucky American infrastructure in other municipalities' rights of way, and that has been done generally by acquisition agreement. For example, when Kentucky American purchased the Owenton system, there's an asset purchase agreement that essentially includes the ability for Kentucky American to have its infrastructure in the Owenton right of way. I do not, I guess my only point on that was that there is so, on a percentage basis, the amount of Kentucky American infrastructure in municipal right-of-way other than in the city of Lexington or in the state right-of-way is extremely small. So you're talking about essentially Owenton, North Middletown, and a couple of other very small municipalities. And in fact, for those, most of the time, to my knowledge, Kentucky American's infrastructure is in state right-of-way rather than in small municipal roads. So sorry for the long-winded response, but I just want to make sure the record's clear on the existence of franchise agreements and why there's only the LFUCG went on file with the Public Service Commission.
Okay, and I wasn't being accusatory, Mr. Ingram. I just was, curiosity on my part, because as Kentucky American is wont to grow, this might be an issue. As there's additional plant outside of Fayette County, it might be an issue later on. That's why I was probing around for that.
Absolutely, and I only give you that response solely because I want the record to be complete and clear and accurate on it, as you understand, I'm sure.
Understood. Thank you very much. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for this witness? Okay, I think Mr. Stafford can be excused. Do you have any other witnesses, Mr. Ingram?
We do. We have Miss Elaine Chambers.
Okay. If she could talk so that the camera can go to her.
Hello?
Can I ask for a second? Would it? I'm not sure how much in the way of questioning there is for Miss Chambers. Would it make any sense to take a short break and reconvene, or do you want to plow on through, Mr. Vice Chairman? Whatever you'd like to do.
If you need a break, we can go till 10. So we say 10:20. Let's go to 10:30. We'll come back at 10:30. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll be in recess until 10:30. Okay, we're back in session. And Mr. Ingram, do you have another witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The next and last Kentucky American witness in this case is Miss Elaine Chambers.
Hello, Ms. Chambers.
Good morning.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you
Yes.
swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ingram, you may ask.
Ms. Chambers, would you state your full name for the record?
Elaine K. Chambers.
And would you tell us your job title and business address, please?
Director of Rates and Regulatory for Kentucky American Water, 2300 Richmond Road, Lexington, Kentucky.
Ms. Chambers, did you cause to be filed in this docket your written direct testimony on March 2nd, 2020?
Yes.
And if I asked you the same questions here today that were set forth in that written direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers, were you also the identified responsible witness for several of the data responses Kentucky American provided in this case in response to some commission staff questions?
Yes.
And if I asked you those same questions and those data requests here today, would your answers be the same as provided in Kentucky American's data responses?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. Ms. Vinsel, Ms. Chambers is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Good morning, Ms. Chambers. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
Good, good. Let me start out with a question that Mr. Penny asked Mr. Stafford. Are you able to discuss what controls are in place to ensure that spending on the QUIP projects are kept separate from the other capital budget spending?
Yes, I am. I think the best way to show you this would be to walk you through my attachment in my testimony. I'll attempt to display it. If I fail, I may ask for Lindsay's help. Let me get my spreadsheet.
Okay.
Pardon?
I was going to say, and we're talking about the work papers that were filed as an exhibit to your direct testimony, correct?
Correct. So if you give me 1 second, I will try to pull this up and get this on the screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we have a couple tabs here. This tab called the QIP spend, January 20th through June 21. This covers 18 months of spend. We spent quite a bit of time on this spreadsheet earlier discussing amounts. There is a second spreadsheet called placed into service. Before I go there, I want to point out this column here. So there is actually a lag between when we make spend, when we spend dollars, and when it goes into service. So if we go to the placed in service tab, you'll see for line B, the RP, the months in service date, there's a 2-month difference. So I'm going to move over here and show you the amount. And I'm not, let's see. I need to move something so I can show you, or so I can see it. Okay, so here's, can everyone see July?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, 400,000. And that, okay. On the placed in service tab, if we go to July, you'll see it comes from the QIP spend tab, and it has that 2-month delay that we were just talking about. So we use the same kind of parameters in the rate case. So the July in service actually had to be spent 2 months earlier for it to be in service in July, according to these assumptions. And that's exactly how we did the rate case. So that provides a clear line of demarcation between the rate case and the QIP spend.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm checking to make sure that none of my coworkers have asked a further question for that one. Appears not.
Okay.
I want a follow up on one of the responses to data request, and this is about the retirement ratio.
Yes.
And I'm really looking at a comment and hoping to have you expand upon it. Now let's go back. Let me have you explain rather than me ask a different question. Can you explain exactly what the retirement ratio is?
Sure. So because this is a projected period, we don't know exactly what retirements are going to be. So what we did is we took 3 months of data and 3 months of additions. We averaged those 3 months of data for the retirements and for the additions, and we did a division to come up with a ratio. That is used for projecting what we think retirements will be, since we don't know. I think in the rate case, we projected something like 8-something%. In this case, we're projecting 7.24, I believe. So it's an estimate of what we think the retirements on the additions that we put into service will be. This is a number that will not be exact. So when we do the reconciliation, we will use the exact numbers that are in our books and records for retirements, just like we would for the exact numbers for additions and exact numbers for retirements. All of the pieces that we are projecting here we would use actuals in the reconciliation. So it's strictly a tool to estimate what retirements will be that are associated with the additions we're putting in based on historical data.
Okay. I think with that, you have answered my question. So I'm going to move on to a similar piece.
Okay.
The depreciation rates.
Yes.
We know that you proposed 2.2% depreciation rate. Can you walk us through it just like you do with the retirement ratio? Explain what it is and how you obtain that number?
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the depreciation expense tab. Well, let's see. I'm not going to click on that. So it's easier than that.
Mhm.
We use the same kind of process for depreciation expense because we don't know what the number's actually going to be. We take all, let me see if I can get you there. I can't see the right side of my screen, so it causes me to have difficulties. So let me look on my paper copy and see if I can get you to the right screen.
Do you think it's the Excel file you filed in response to PSC 113?
It is it's easier to see it on this file if I can find a way to show you. Okay, so it's the depreciation rates tab. And here we go. All right, good. We can see it, or at least I can see it. In column G, you'll note a code column, and if it has a 1, that indicates that that utility plan account is included in this QIP filing. So we took the depreciation expense for all the 1s and added them up to come up with this composite rate. For the depreciation rates that you see here are the rates approved the last time we had a depreciation study in the rate case. So we only included the depreciation rates that were applicable to QUIP that were approved by the commission. And instead of, we came up with a composite rate in the DR that you were referencing earlier. We did it both ways, without the composite rate and with the composite rate. And the amount of difference, I believe, was $3,000. So again, this is a tool to estimate what we think the depreciation expense is going to be. We know it's going to change. This is something we would true up in the filing with the reconciliation. So it's not, we use averages in other jurisdictions. That's to try to make sure that we're being as accurate as we can be with historical data projecting into the future.
And then, of course, with the knowledge that we've got the balancing
Correct.
mechanism.
Right. Any issue that we had in our forecast will be corrected in the reconciliation filing.
And I've just got one last question here. And this is in regard to the retirement and removal of aging main. Is the old main physically removed from the ground when a main is replaced?
Okay, my understanding is it may be physically removed or it could be abandoned in place. And Kurt would be better at telling you why sometimes it's abandoned in place versus removing. But my understanding is if there are other lines in the way or that we might damage, we might abandon it in place instead of removing it, if there's a danger of hurting other infrastructure that is located with us. That's my understanding.
Okay. I do not have any more questions at this time for Ms. Chambers. Vice Chair, I would ask that once the cross is completed with Ms. Chambers, that I be allowed to ask Mr. Stafford to see if he has more information he would like to provide to that question.
I think we can arrange for that.
Okay.
Commissioner Matthews, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay. And I think Ms. Vincent was very clear in asking her question about this, but from an accounting perspective, I have to ask it one more time. And that is, right now you're using all of these spreadsheets to develop a forecast of estimated depreciation and retirements. Is that correct?
Correct.
But when you do the actual reconciliation, you will take the assets that have been actually removed and take those retirements out at the actual amounts that are incurred.
Absolutely. That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Ingram, do you have any redirect?
I do not. If I have one question on redirect, but it's probably more appropriate for Mr. Stafford. So if we're going to call him back, I'll just ask him that redirect question.
Okay. Mr. Penny, did you have any questions?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. So this witness may be excused, and we'd like Mr. Stafford to come back as a witness.
Okay, so Ms. Chambers, we'll need you to stop sharing your screen if you could.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, did that. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Stafford, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you're still under oath, so I think Ms. Vinsel had a question for you to start with.
Good morning, Mr. Stafford. So the question then, to build upon Ms. Chambers' response about when Maine is removed from the ground, sometimes it's actually physically removed and other times it's abandoned in place. Could you expand upon what goes into the decision for either one?
Sure. So let's just take an example. Say we have a street that's 1,000 feet long, and we want to replace that 1,000 feet of, we talked earlier about cast iron. Say we want to replace that 1,000 feet of cast iron. So obviously the customers, we want to keep our customers in service and minimize any disruptions as much as possible. So typically what we would do during the design phase, we'd go out and we would survey the other utilities and find a route for that new replacement water main that would go down the street. And we would leave the old main in service as much as possible and lay the new one parallel. So once we got the new one installed, we would test it, and then we would tie the old services over. So we would tie the customers on that same 1,000-foot section. We would tie them over to the new main, and then we would, at the end of the project, we would essentially condemn the old main. So we would leave it mostly in place, but we would disconnect it from the existing system and tie the new main in at the ends of it, or wherever there's connection points, if there's side streets or whatever that connect to it. So it's typically what we try to do is just we'll leave the old main in place as much as possible. At times, there may be conflicts like Ms. Chambers mentioned out the street where we have to abandon things and dig out more pieces of it, but we try to leave it in place as much as possible and just make connections from the old main to the new main at the end of the project. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Vice Chairman, I have no further questions for Mr. Stafford.
Mr. Matthews, did you have any follow-up you wanted to ask Mr. Stafford?
I don't.
Mr. Ingram, you wanted to do a redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, this will just take a second. I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Stafford, I know this sounds odd, but this kind of the way this is developed as this morning has gone. I'm showing you here, do you recognize this as the cover page of Ms. Chambers' direct testimony in this QIP case?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and then it's a fairly short piece of testimony. I'm going to go all the way to the last page. And this is her exhibit number 1 to her direct testimony. And do you recognize that exhibit just based on your familiarity with this case, Mr. Stafford?
Yes, I do.
And do you see her, and this is where Ms. Chambers kind of sets forth the total amount requested in this QIP application. And from a revenue requirement standpoint, that would be about 1.6 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So Kentucky American's asking for about a 1.62% amount to be applied to be used in the line item charge on customer bills beginning July 1st of this year. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then in your testimony earlier this morning, there was some discussion with Vice Chairman Cicero about the 12.4 million in gross plant changes. Is that about that 12.5 million number? Is that the same number we talked about earlier this morning that I had my cursor on?
Yes, it is.
And so that 12.5 million, that is the number that is derived from all your different budget line items that you spoke to earlier this morning. Your main replacement, your line item B, which is about 7.4 million, but then all the other budget line items that you discussed in some of your spreadsheets, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So if this commission were to decide at some point in the future that it wants Kentucky American to place more of an emphasis on main replacements rather than on other QIP eligible plant, but still authorize the full amount requested in the case, would your budgeting process allow you to kind of take from one pot and put it in the other, so to speak, and I guess to be more exact, would it allow you to remove or move money in your projected budget from some of your budget line items that are QIP eligible over to different budget line items that are QIP eligible while still holding true to the total $12.5 million ask?
Yes, we could do that.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. That's all I have, Vice Chairman.
No, thank you for that question, because I think you're responding to my comments, and obviously I don't believe the commission has any issue with granting spend on a qualified improvement program, but as I mentioned prior, I would like to see more money spent on main replacement than on some of the other projects that have been identified. And again, I understand that what Kentucky American Water did was identify projects that were previously identified in the case. That was the rate case in 2018. But what we're looking at maybe going into the future is changing some of the emphasis to be more focused on the main replacement. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm just trying to give you an idea where I think the commission's focus is when it comes to this infrastructure replacement.
Thank you, Your Honor. And we just wanted to demonstrate that Kentucky American can be flexible, and as Mr. Rowe has stated numerous times at this commission, we'll do what the commission directs us to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Stafford, I think you can be excused as a witness for a final time this time, unless anybody else has any questions. Thank you. Do you have any more witnesses, Mr. Stafford, or Mr. Ingram?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so at this point, I don't believe any exhibits were introduced, so there's no marking of that. The only thing we have is, Mr. Pinney, you had a data request, right?
Yes, Ms. Vensel spoke to Mr. Ingram while you're out of the hearing room, so we haven't settled on a date, but she's clarified with him what the contents were.
Okay, so we'll issue a written request for staff's post-hearing data request by the 15th of May, okay?
Okay.
And then, Mr. Ingram, can you have, I think there's only a couple, you can have it back by the 22nd of May?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so you're not going to brief this, are you? Or are you?
Well, I don't, what I'd like to do is the short answer to your question is no, I don't think so. But what I would like to do before I give you a final answer on that, I'd like to talk to the Kentucky American team that has worked on this case, some of whom are behind the scenes and not here today before we have a final decision. I just don't want to commit to not filing a brief without making sure Kentucky American's okay with that. So if I could have just a day or two to make that decision and let Ms. Vensel know, I would appreciate that.
Okay, I'll let you coordinate it with Ms. Vensel, but I would say that if you do plan on filing a brief, I'm going to request it by May 29th.
That's no problem, Your Honor.
Okay. I guess that would be it, unless anybody has anything else?
Oh, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.